sounds great.
Oh, there we go. It's going.
There we go.
Yeah, so I'm just going to turn this over to Becky now, who's going to introduce our speakers and field your questions.
Hi, everybody. My name is Becky Bassick. I'm social media manager here at ACER, and we are running a webinar today called Riparian Rangers, a Young Tree Monitoring Program. And we have several speakers joining us today, and first of which is our program director, Nemisha Bosniaka, who's going to give a brief introduction to what Riparian Rangers is. So if you'd like to start things off for us, Nemisha, that'd be awesome. Okay.
The Riparian Rangers program is a planting and or measuring, tagging, and mapping program that we've created. We do it along riparian zones, which is 50 meters from a water course. And we usually do this in partnership with a city or conservation authority. And in the next slide, you'll be able to see the project that we've set up so far. This year, we did work with Essex, Ray-Ban, Mississippi Valley, and Central Lake Ontario. Two of the speakers are from conservation authorities that we work with this year. And now we'll just get right into the speakers. I guess Rebecca will introduce the next speaker.
So first, we'd like to welcome Stephanie Smith. She is the project coordinator at Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. Thanks for joining us, Stephanie.
Hi, thank you for having me. We're very excited to speak today about our version of the program. So we call ours the Young Tree and Shrub Maintenance and Monitoring Program. It's a program that TRCA set up with ACER to use their Riparian Rangers program. We've modified it just a little bit for our watershed needs. So our program overview, with our manager, Vince Stelia, he and ACER developed a protocol to manage and track plantings done through our community-based restoration projects. And so that's members of the public, corporations, schools, and community groups. The monitoring for us is an opportunity to conduct both important maintenance and knowledge gathering that can be beneficial in the earliest stages of growth as the plants try and establish. So it also helps connect us to our participants by just showing and demonstrating the care that we give to the plants after they're planted. So we don't just plant these plants and walk away. The program can help us maintain that connection with those groups. It also allows us to discover, monitor, react to survival trends and plant requirements on both a large and a small scale. And through our YTM program, we've set up a volunteer arm where we get members of the public to come in and help do our monitoring and maintenance as well, which has really expanded our capacity and helped us connect even further with members of the public. So what we do is we take a minimum of 10% of the plants that are planted, and we tag them with a unique identifier. So instead of setting up quadrants, we get a sampling throughout the site based on different elevations or different types of soil in a certain site to see which plants do best in which areas. And then at this time, we'll take baseline measurements when we initially plant with these community groups. And through that, we can try and get a handle on any changes for our stance and pests, any sort of browsing that's taken place, and just general site observations. And so we'll do that once a year, 3 to 5 years after we've planted. So through site maintenance, we have a variety of activities that we carry out, the maintenance being one of the big important parts of our program. So in the beginning, we focused a lot on monitoring and getting that growth measurement data, and now we've really integrated our maintenance piece as well in response to some of the data that we were collecting in the earlier years of the program. Yes, perfect. So the community groups, in this case, in the site maintenance area of the program, the community groups are essential in increasing our capacity for the site maintenance. We wouldn't be able to go back and give these plants the attention they deserve if it wasn't for the community and the public members that were helping us. And while we monitor in the spring, we try and get an idea of what the site is going to look like. We'll do maintenance at the same time around the plants that we're monitoring and around the plants in the immediate vicinity. And then from that, we can draw our plans for maintenance throughout the season, including competition, browse, mitigation, and watering. Great. So as you can see from our graph, the planting numbers have decreased for us because we're really trying to add in more added value activities, including education, and YTMP being a huge part of this. So when we're going to different plantings with different community groups, instead of just focusing on getting all these plants in the ground, we're focusing more on the holistic site management. And that includes picking up garbage, doing those invasive controls, and monitoring and maintaining at the time of planting. So where do we do this? This is throughout our jurisdiction, TRCA's jurisdiction. It's mostly focused in the Etobicoke-Mimico watershed. That's the division that I'm part of, but other departments in our organization have really seen the benefit of doing YTMP, so we're starting to spread out throughout the entire TRCA jurisdiction. And then our program contributions, the areas that we've maintained and monitored keep going up. So even though this year we're taking down some 2013 sites, they've reached their 5-year limit, we're still increasing both the area and the number of times we go back to an area. So without our volunteers, we would never be able to go back and do all of these sites. So there's a lot of benefits. I touched on some of them a bit earlier, but not only connecting our community members to our sites, but we have been able to identify some barriers for planting success in areas that we have been able to mitigate thanks to the program. We also help with the education portion. So it increases the survival rate of our plants, it increases the connection of the community, and it increases our ability to educate the public, and hopefully they carry that knowledge with them in their day-to-day lives so they can have a better connection to their neighboring green space. So some of the data collection that we've seen, this is a specific site example. We've been looking at the benefits of deer fencing in certain areas, and with this one site, Edward Scarlett Park, we were able to see that the survival rate was so low without deer fencing because of how much browse we were putting in, that it was worth any further plantings at that site to have a fully fenced-in area. And we're just going back to infill some of those sites that we've recently put fencing around, so we can see just from the data we've collected the impact we're having with these large ticket items for return on investment. And this is just another result that we can get from our data collection. We can see if something is heavily browsed in one year, what is the chance that that'll be alive in the next year based on species and location and based on what's browsing them. So we have a lot of data that we collect from this program, and it's just a matter of having the time and being able to pick what we're focusing on to see what has the biggest impact. So next steps, what we're really trying to do is focus on tracking invasive species, so putting more of an emphasis on if we're seeing different insects at the site, marking it down from year to year, if we see any difference, if there's anything coming from the nursery that's impacting survival, so determining which plants are coming from where and what their baseline browse or insect damages, and then how that impacts future years. We also want to move to an all app remonitoring. So when our community groups and citizens go back into the field, anytime they're remonitoring, they'll be using a tablet to do that, which is going to help speed up our data analysis process. And we want to expand that volunteer program. So anytime we have needs for people to go back into the field, we want to get as many people as possible. We're also getting community groups to start to take ownership of each site. So we're starting to launch that pilot program next year, where one community group is going to be responsible for the maintenance, for the monitoring, and for any planting we do in that site area through the YPMP program. And we're just looking into, since we started watering, we want to see the impact of that throughout the sites year to year. So a lot of the sites, when we were doing our original monitoring, what we saw was they really were getting dehydrated, especially on floats. So we want to see the impact of our frequent watering on those sites. And we can hopefully justify, again, the cost of going out and sending staff out to water. So we have a bunch of resources that we've developed with ACER as well, and they help when we go out into the field for plant identification, which is part of our education program when we go and remonitor with the community and with those groups planting with us on the day. So yeah, this is our native tree and shrub guide, and it has pictures of bark, bud, and small leaves, and we find it very, very helpful for those groups. The collector, this is our in-app recording information, so it's just drop-down information. We're using the Esri Collector app that we are working with our GIS team to streamline for our needs. It's not super perfect for monitoring day of, because it's a little hard to get your head around, and when we're writing it down, we have better ability to go back and review what people are doing. But for our groups that have been trained, that are going out to do remonitoring, they have a little more autonomy and can use the electronic capturing device. And of course, we work with our municipalities and our community groups, and we've set this program up with ACER, and they're an extremely important partner. We would not be able to do our program without it and get all those great benefits that we're getting from this program. So that is it. We really want to, our goal is to make sure that people get a connection to their environment. They see the work that TRCA is putting in for their plantings. We want to make sure that people understand that it is important to maintain year after year until a planting gets established, and that's the best way that we're going to have success as a community and as an organization. And that is everything. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Stephanie. So if any folks have questions, please feel free to type them into the chat, and we'd like to do sort of a grouped question period at the end so we can address everything at once.
Wonderful.
So great. Thank you very much, Stephanie.
Thank you.
So our next speaker is Gina Pannunzio, and she is the Partnerships and Outreach Coordinator, Essex Region Conservation Authority.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. I don't know if I'm supposed to click on something for my mic on my end.
We can hear you. You're a little bit quiet, though.
Oh, okay.
That's a little better. There we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thanks for having me. So together a few slides that outline what we did this year. Our project was focused on our Earth Day site. So ACER was able to fund 1,000 of the trees planted, and we planted early spring 2018 on the site that we picked for this project. And our Earth Day event is a significant event in our community. We've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of great partners to help put on this big planting. We work with the City of Windsor for the partnering municipality that provides the land for where the trees are going. And through our partnership with the Detroit River Canadian Cleanup and the provincial government and Environment Canada, we've been able to fund all of the trees that we plant. And we have community partners like the Little River Enhancement Group, Essex County Field Naturalist Club, and other groups across the community that come out and help us put the trees in the ground and host the event. And so to give you some local context, the Earth Day site is in the Little River watershed, and the Little River watershed is part of the larger Detroit River watershed, and about 60 kilometers square drains into the Detroit River. There is significant wildlife in this area, and the site specifically has a stormwater pond that captures runoff from a neighboring developed residential area. And along the trail system is a high traffic area. A lot of people like to recreate down that trail, and this is the 90th planting that the Little River Enhancement Group, they've planted over 90 community plantings in this watershed in particular, and so this Earth Day project is a big contribution to the restoration of that watershed. So I'm going to just go through these really quick. I don't really have much context, but I just wanted to show some aerial footage or photos of the site as it's changed from 2000, where you can see there's not really much there except some farm fields. And feel free to just kind of click through until 2017, I think. So you can start to see the stormwater ponds are dug and they're forming. There's more development in the area over time. Neighborhoods are being built. And this is what the site looked like last year. And so to give you some context on how many years we've been planting here, these are just some of my notes that I've made. We've planted in 2017. That was the first year that we started our Earth Day planting here. And we started on the north end of the site. And then 2018, we worked our way down around the south bend. 2019 plans are to kind of continue around the stormwater pond and then hopefully also have a 2020 planting as well to keep the Earth Day celebrations here at this site. The City of Windsor is a really great partner. They help with providing mulch, and they mow the areas where there's a lot of vegetation that needs to be taken down, and they help with other resources that we need to help put on the event as well. And then to give you the scope of how many trees we planted in 2018, we planted 306 large stock trees and then 1,900 seedlings. We've planted species that do well in wetter areas, so sycamore, Freeman maple, swamp white oak, bur oak, red oak, American elm, pin oak, and some red cedar. And we plant the trees 8 to 10 feet apart. And the way that we do that is in the morning we'll set up flags. Pink ones are for the seedlings, the blue ones are for large stock, and then we have sort of stations where everyone from the community who's planting can come grab their trees, and then we have them plant where we've put the flags out. And of course, because we're hosting community planting, there are some factors in the long-term survival of our trees, and these are just some of the things that I've noticed over the years that we struggle with in terms of our quality control. So trees that are planted too deep or too shallow, people putting the mulch on the tree in a volcano style instead of the donut style. Some people don't put enough mulch on, so the trees are left, and sometimes they don't, because they don't dig them deep enough. The whole surface of the potted tree is exposed. Some people plant with the pot left on the tree. Some people plant the plastic wrap left on the seedlings. For a few years, we were planting with bare root stock. We don't do that anymore, but when we were, we would notice that the roots would be J-rooting up and coming out of the ground like a foot away from the base of the tree. And some people didn't know how to separate the seedling plugs, so we would see like 5 planted in one hole. And sometimes when the roots are root bound in the pot, we notice there's a lot of rough handling of the trees. Some people don't plant the trees straight, and some people don't follow where the flags are, so their trees way too close to another tree. And then, of course, other non-human factors that we are also facing here in Essex County, like drought, heat, wildlife, insects, etc. So because of that factor, and because we have a lot of interest and investment in our Earth Day site, the opportunity to work with ACER and come up with some baseline information about our Earth Day plantings was very timely. And so when we sort of set out the plan, we picked 100 of the large stock trees at our site. The seedlings were too small, so we didn't focus on them. And the same species that we planted, we made sure we had representation for all of the species on site for the 100 sample size. And then the way that we offered the workshop in the community, we put it out on Eventbrite for registration, and then we posted it on our website, basically framing it that coming out, you'll gain experience from collecting field data, working with native trees, doing a health assessment, using equipment, meeting other people that are interested in trees, and then sort of continuing the Earth Day planting and focus on the project. And that was a really good opportunity because a lot of University of Windsor students came out, some families that lived in the neighborhood, and people that actually just had participated in the Earth Day planting came out as well because they were interested in what happens to the trees afterwards. And that was in June. And so in terms of the data that we were collecting, because it was a baseline, we focused on the ACER protocol. And in general, we kind of noticed that there was about 70% survival of large potted stock. And then just sort of me eyeballing all the seedlings, it was a much lower percentage, maybe 55 to 60% that had survived. And this was all really helpful because there is, like I mentioned, there's a lot of community interest in our Earth Day site. People are invested in it. People are continuing to return, and they're experienced planters, so they want to know how the trees are doing. And we noticed that, with the volunteer groups in our area, they want meaningful volunteer experience. So having something like at the workshop to offer them was a good opportunity to connect them to what IRCA does and some of our, and they could put those skills on their resume and develop some of the fieldwork experience. And of course, we have our partners that we work with. They're always interested in how the sites are doing, especially because a lot of funding goes into purchasing the trees. So the Public Advisory Council and the Education and Public Involvement Work Group from the Detroit River Canadian Cleanup, they're always asking for reports back on how the Earth Day planting went and what's happening at the site. And of course, media attention. This summer, we experienced some drought, and the trees were a little bit stressed out. So the media asked me to come back to the site, I think in July, to give a talk on what was happening to the trees. So having this survival assessment done and showing them the data and being able to communicate back to the community about what was happening was really helpful and timely. And in terms of our plans for 2019, we're definitely going to offer the workshop again in June after our 2019 planting. We're going to expand the reach of the citizen scientists at the Earth Day site. So I'm going to try to find some additional things that we could be collecting in terms of our survival assessment and just general assessment of the site. And this will continue to help me report back to funders and supporters of our community tree planting and restoration programs. And this is a teachable moment regarding climate change and discussing how trees are, we're looking at this, and we're right at the base of Canada, and we're the front line for any changes to our forests from climate change. I'd like to include a photo inventory of health issues of the trees, and so I can start building a library of resources for all of our citizen scientists who will continue to work with us on tree surveys. I'd like to also include a seedling protocol and include that with our large stock. Maybe I'll increase the sample size, and we'll continue to take measurements of our 2018 trees too, so that we can have start the second year of data and look at if there's been any changes from last year. And that's it. So thank you for the opportunity for including me in this. This was a good learning experience this year.
Well, thanks so much, Gina. That was amazing. And so our third speaker today is Patricia Lowe, and she is involved in community engagement at the Central Lake Ontario Conservation Authority.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'll start by saying we're still in the honeymoon phase with ACER. We've celebrated our 2-month anniversary, completing our planting in late October and initiating our baseline monitoring in the first week of November. So we're relatively new. So I thought what I would do is share with you some context of this particular property and why partnerships with organizations like ACER are so important to conservation authorities in reforestation efforts. So next slide, please. So just to give you some context for our jurisdiction, our neighbors to the left of the slide or to the west is Toronto Region Conservation. To the east is Ganaraska. North of, I guess on the we share the Oak Ridges Moraine. North east is Kawartha Conservation, and northwest is Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority. We're 627 square kilometers, so a fairly small conservation authority, but we own 2,700 hectares of public land, and that makes up our land holdings of 8 conservation areas. Our Riparian Rangers project focused on the Enniskillen Conservation Area, which is located in the Bowmanville Creek headwaters. Next slide. What's significant about the Enniskillen Conservation Area where we're doing the planting is we started purchasing land in 2004, more than 518 hectares involving 15 landowners and 22 parcels of land, which we secured using a fee simple acquisition. And our goal was and continues to be to further protect and enhance the cultural and natural heritage of this landscape. Obviously, continue to support land and water stewardship efforts, provide education and recreational opportunities that respect and celebrate this unique and unchanged landscape. Many of you probably know our former CAO, Russ Powell, and we refer to this as one of his many legacies was this Enniskillen land acquisition program. So the project was publicly funded. I note that because at the time, the Oak Ridges Marine Foundation was very active in providing funds to purchase land. We were able to leverage money from the Region of Durham, the former Ministry of Natural Resources, and the Ontario Heritage Foundation. And with ownership and ownership and funding comes deliverables. So we spent about 2 years inventorying and assessing the resources within that acquisition area to develop a stewardship plan for implementation. And the deliverables were to move forward with soil stabilization through reforestation, and here's, I guess, to follow a bit of a summary of how we arrived at that conclusion. So the land is nested on the south slope of the Oak Ridges Moraine. No surprise, it's hydrogeologically significant in that it certainly provides recharge and discharge. In the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan, it's identified as a natural core area, further supported by our ecological inventory. So we wanted to make sure we maintained and enhanced this part of the core wildlife area in the Bowmanville Creek. Obviously, we're in a headwater area, Bowmanville Creek watershed, and it's one of the few watersheds in our jurisdiction that meets most watershed health targets and continues to show up in the B grades of our Conservation Ontario report cards. American eel is present in this headwater area, and it's identified as endangered and facing imminent extinction. We also know our groundwater resources are key to creek-based flows, which has been confirmed through our integrated watershed monitoring program, and we note very few impacts to its classification as a cold water stream. The brook trout continues to benefit, as do many other aquatic invertebrates that we don't always find in our other watersheds. And most of the land in between our mixed deciduous and coniferous forests consists of retired hayfields. The topography and soil did not lend themselves to cropping practices, hence the hayfields. We have loam and sandy loam that is very susceptible to wind erosion, sheet and gully erosion, particularly along the steep slopes and valley lands. So one of our outcomes, or one of the goals of that stewardship plan, was to reforest the retired hayfields, and that would be a way to increase forest cover on a watershed scale, but also looking at deep forest interior reforestation would obviously support that as well. I won't talk too much more about the soil erosion. I think I already covered that. So next slide, please. So this is an aerial photograph of the lands we acquired over that period of time. There's a small parcel to the south that was our original land holding, so quite a significant increase. And I would ask you to note the residential community to the right of Enniskillen. That's the community of Enniskillen, and that is significant in supporting our Riparian Ranger program going forward. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. Just to give you a brief overview of our restoration efforts over the past 3 or 4 years, we, as landowners, we're land rich and often very poor when it comes to budgets for restoring or enhancing those landscapes. So we were fortunate to forge a partnership with Tree Canada. So just to give you an idea of some of the numbers of tree plantings we did in 2015, 16, and 17. And obviously our funder requires audits by a professional forester. And as you see there, our 2-year survival assessments were poor on one of the sites where we planted 20,000 trees. The survival was 27.5, and another site was 63.7. So we had a plan to replant the sites in 2019. That would give us some time to find the funding, revise the prescriptions, lessons learned. There was a lot of competition on the site from the hay. We didn't do enough tending. We had a drought in 2016. We probably went too diverse with our planting species. And so we learned from that, but we thought we'd have a year to raise some funds, and we got the notice from True Canada. They wanted it all done in 2018. We got that notice March the 2nd of 2018, so we really had to hustle to achieve those bottom 2 targets. Next slide. So just to share with you, in the agreement with Tree Canada, it's very clear that if they deem the responsibility of the failure of a particular planting to not meet that 70% target, they expect that corporation or business to take responsibility for replanting and infilling. So we weren't 100% that it was entirely our fault, but we signed that agreement. So we moved forward with the forester that actually did the original audit. We hired him to help us come up with the new prescriptions and find the contractors. I mean, at this point, we hadn't even ordered our trees yet, and we were in March. So not a lot of availability at that time. So this slide is really to show you how key partnerships with folks like ACER, TD Trees, Days through TD Friends of the Environment, which I noticed in a lot of the images of TRCA and Essex, that other partnerships that we benefit from in terms of tree planting. Highway of Heroes, obviously we pulled some money out of our forest reserves So there was our budget, and when you've already submitted your budget and had it approved by the board at March 2nd, you are in a real panic if you have to go back and ask for more funding. So those partnerships were key. Next slide. And we will continue doing our auditing and tending, but we also recognize we need some measurables and some data and a way to engage the community that certainly helped us along the way with community planting. Next slide. So just to give you an overview of where we are at with the Riparian Rangers, we're focused on one of the tracks of the Enniskillen area. Great trail access. People can come in from the north and south entrances. We selected 100 white pine planted on that slope you can see in the foreground. We learned we had to prep the site and machine plant at this particular site from our failures with Tree Canada. There were our dates for plantings. So the 13th was a community planting, and the 8th and 26th we hired a contractor. And I have to tell you, ACER was very flexible and very supportive of making decisions at the last minute to make changes to our planting plans. So that flexibility was really important for us. As I said, we're on our honeymoon, tree flagging. I went out with Alice and Anisha on November 1st, and we did the flagging, and they basically trained me in how to do the monitoring. And then we had two students from the Take Your Children to Work Day or Take Your Kids to Work Day, and they actually came out and did the baseline survey for us on November 13th. Next slide. So going forward, I asked you to note in that aerial photograph the adjacent community of Enniskillen. They have a public school there that we should be engaging more. They do participate in our education program. They go kindergarten to grade 6, 2 kilometers away, so either walking, busing, or car drop-off of students to the location in November will certainly work for us going forward. I really appreciated hearing the other presentations because we are at the point where we need to develop this maintenance and monitoring program to meet our needs. So maybe borrowing some of those ideas from our colleagues at other conservation authorities. And also would like to continue with the Take Your Kids to Work programs if the timing seems to work, so we can accommodate more high school students that perhaps help mentor the grade 6s at the local school, and obviously the local community in some maintenance opportunities going forward. We also offer an education program, curriculum-based, called In Your Watershed at this particular site, so we can perhaps offer this program, particularly the maintenance, but maybe even the monitoring, to schools that have been identified as perhaps at risk or in need of some opportunities for environmental education without cost. So we may explore that a little bit. And obviously we'll have to do some staff training. We have 2 education instructors who are probably on this webinar today, and we will do some field training to get them familiar with the monitoring piece and brainstorm a little bit on how we can incorporate some maintenance and some future volunteer opportunities at this particular site. Next slide, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Patricia. That was fantastic. And so at this time, we'd like to leave a few minutes for any questions that folks have. So if anybody has questions that they've submitted in chat, we can answer those. And of course, speakers, you're more than welcome. If you have questions for one another, we can address those as well. Okay, well, it looks like we don't have any questions at the moment. Is there anything any speakers would like to add, or Manisha may have a question, or anything anybody would like to ask is welcome.
This is Alice. First of all, thank you to the panelists and the people who signed in to listen to the webinar, and to Becky and Misha for preparing everything, number one. But my question is there anything that you could consider including in a short testimonial, anybody who's listening, for ACER's programs that you have had, or anyone new who would like to have? We're just interested in feedback to our programs. I know we've had the panelists talk about it, but if there's anybody else out there, and including the panelists, who would send us a little paragraph or a sentence, something about the ACER Riparian Rangers program. Namisha is running the program, and she's being very modest sitting beside me, but I want to put that question to everybody. Thank you.
And for the record, Alice is our wonderful, illustrious director. So thank you, Alice.
Yeah, no, we'd be more than happy to send in a testimonial for the program. We've had great success with it, and a lot of people we're working with, our partners, are also very interested in it to help with a lot of the new auditing needs that are coming up. I found it really interesting, the other presentations, because a lot of the times we do see sometimes lower success rates at our sites, and it's one of those delicate situations where if we have a group that's invested at a site that, you know, we did learn lessons and can improve next time, it's still a little nerve-wracking talking to them about it, because everybody just wants everything to do really well. So it's nice to hear that everybody's sort of in that same situation.
Well,
yeah, that'd be amazing. Please go ahead.
It's Patricia here. I know with our project, just the scale of the planting, it had to be contracted. It had to be machine planted, but it's always nice to have a community component there. And I really love the slide that was the survival factors, because that's a great list, and you're right, we all are challenged at those community plantings, and I think sometimes we have to remember it's less about the tree survival and more about connecting those people to nature. And so very often after a planting, we go around and replant the trees, which sort of defeats the purpose of what we're doing, but it's just a reminder that the community isn't going to, the accomplishments of the community are a small part of the bigger reforestation efforts. I think that's the message.
Yeah, absolutely. You cannot underestimate the importance of community involvement and getting folks involved with the projects. And Jane just asked how many conservation authorities are involved with the project. And currently ACER is involved with 13 conservation authorities right now.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so most of these projects have been funded by the Great Lake Guardian Community Fund. And TRCA obviously has continued on with more sites, and I'm not entirely sure where their funding comes from, if it's from them or other funders. But initially for us, the funding came from the Great Lake Guardian Community Fund, which is part of the Ontario government.
Yeah, I know a lot of the funding for us comes from different sources, and throughout this winter we're looking into getting some more grants to help fund the program and move it forward, specifically with the volunteer aspect.
And Gina was just asking if Stephanie from TRCA could explain a bit more about the ESRI Collector Act.
Okay, yeah. So that's an app that was developed by Esri, I believe, a mapping company, and it's basically you can have, so when you're trying to monitor your plants, you put a GPS point on, so you're using your tablet, you put a GPS point on your map, and it can be modified to have a survey for the questions that you would ask when you're monitoring. So you can enter in all your data line by line, and it saves it, and then you can view the application on your desktop, and you can export it to Excel. So basically, when we're out there remonitoring, everything can be collected, tagged to a geolocation, and then we can even eventually have a dashboard which shows up some quick statistics for our plantings. It's been a long time sort of getting a technological component to monitoring, just because we want to make sure our data is really good, and when people are learning it for the first time, sometimes they'll get root colors that aren't quite right, and on a tablet it's harder to go back and review. But this collector application is starting to really help fill our needs.
And while we're waiting for more questions, just to note that in this program we tag the trees that we measure, and the tags we sell, right now we're selling to TRCA. The other conservation authorities got tags as a part of the grant from Great Lake Guardian Fund, and I think there's a question about the service. So in the past we've done it with grants from Great Lake Guardian Community Fund, which has covered the cost of the trees and us being there. Otherwise, and the tags, and otherwise we have to find a way to fund it through another grant or something. I'm not sure if the Great Lake Guardian Community Fund is going to continue to go on.
We're waiting for news from the new government.
And so I'm not sure if Gina was asking about the collector app. Were you asking about the collector app and whether that's free? Yes. Okay. So is the collector app a free thing?
So I believe that it's a subscription based. I'm not 100% sure on the pricing for that, but I know there's a lower price for conservation authorities and like NGOs. But I do believe it is subscription based.
Okay, that sounds great. That's something we'll have to look into. Thank you.
No problem.
Stephanie, did you modify anything that Esri had to fit your needs, to customize it to TRCA?
Well, the app is just to be, we didn't change anything about that. What we just changed was the form factor, so what questions they were asking and the type of information you could put back in. And so that part is customizable. But the actual app is just the way it is.
Okay, thank you.
I would just add that for CAs, when there is a potential funder, what started us on the ball is we wrote a partnership letter to support your application to the Great Lakes program. So I guess sometimes we get a lot of those requests, and if it does take time to do, but ACER made that really efficient by providing the template, and you knew what you were asking for in your proposal. That was well thought out, so that was a great process. So continue doing that as you secure funds. I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Being as clear as possible, I think, is one of our priorities for sure. Were there any other questions that anybody could think of out there? Namisha, Alice, anything else that you would like to add?
Thanks to everyone. It's been a pleasure to be part of it, and really feel, very successful communication amongst all the people that we've been working with. It's just a thrill to have everybody talking to each other and to us, and we hope to push this forward into 2019. So tell your neighbors, and thanks again.
Oh, one last question. Mulch mats versus mulch.
I know TRCA has been experimenting with both, so putting mulch mats down and chip mulch on top, and that seems to be the very best. And we're just about to look into the size of mulch mats to see if a bigger mulch mat can even make a bigger difference, because that competition is really impacting our survival rates, and it is time intensive to go back and maintain all of the planting.
For Cloca.
All right.
I have a question for Patricia, just to explain the experiment that you undertook with your planting, because we monitored two types of preparation, right? No
right.
Preparation and preparation.
Right. So 50 of the white pine were part of the site that was prepped. We use a Kula. It's an apparatus that goes on the back of the tractor and basically creates a planting hole and a bit of a trench, then we don't need to herbicide. And then the other site was hand planted, and we'll probably follow up with some herbicide tending. So it will be interesting to see the growth rate comparison between those two planting types. And we also used the mulch mats on the site that was prepped, and we didn't use mulch mats on the site that wasn't prepped. Obviously, that's why we have to do the tending. And I just got an email from a company out west that has a type of mat that is more of a felted material. So I've asked them to send us that product, and I think it gets away from the cocoa mat material that we have to import. So I don't know whether it's made out of recycled clothing, or I can't remember what the material was, but I can certainly share it with the group. I'll pull up that email, and obviously if we get some samples, we can try those as well.
All right. Well, I believe we've about come to the end of our time.
Yeah.
Maybe time for us to wrap up. I just wanted to say thank you again to our speakers, Stephanie, Gina, Patricia. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to be here today. And thank you to our attendees. And of course, thank you to Jane Lewington for being our admin at Conservation Ontario.
No problem.
And we will have a recording of this webinar to send out to everyone, and any relevant links and whatnot. We had a couple of videos we wanted to share if there was time at the end, but we'll include those in a follow-up email for everyone to check out later.
Right. Well, thank you very
all
much
again for joining us.
Good. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
The leader has disconnected. The conference will be terminated in 5 minutes.